All right, good morning, everyone. This is Lisa Harnish with Certification Partners. I'm here today with Dr. James Stanger, President and Chief Architect of our CIW program. We're here for the latest CIW webinar, Getting Out of the Box, Understanding and Jailbreaking Your Mobile Device. Good morning, James. You want to say hello to everyone?
Good morning. Good morning, Lisa. How are you doing today? I hope everything's going well for you.
I am just doing fabulous here today.
Good. I'm doing well too. It's a beautiful day. So welcome everybody to the webinar. Lisa, I think you got a few things to tell us about the nature of this webinar.
Yes, we are recording this webinar. We've just started that. We will post that recording on our website along with the slide presentation in a PDF format. That will go up on our webinar page on our regular website in just a few days. Everyone is in muted mode by default. That's so that we can keep the background noise to an absolute minimum. If you have any questions for us, please use the questions tool in your GoToWebinar panel, and I will try to answer those as we are going. If you have any questions for us, I'll try to respond to those and get James to take those for us. James, you want to go ahead and get started?
Absolutely. Well, welcome everybody. I noticed Hani from Saudi Arabia is on board and quite a few people. So welcome for everybody worldwide. Lisa's calling in from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm calling in from the Seattle, Washington area. And we're here talking about how to get out of the box, how to understand and jailbreak your mobile device. And here's the agenda. You should be seeing it in a second. The agenda is where we're going to talk about connection types, about your phone in general, about tethering a little bit, and then rooting and jailbreaking your mobile device or your phone or your tablet, that sort of thing. We'll talk about setting up your home network to work with mobile devices and the best tools and devices and operating systems to use. And we're even going to take a look, folks, at some of the security implications of the phone that you have. Okay, what you can do to control your phone, that sort of thing. So, in many ways, this webcast probably should have been called How to Root and Jailbreak Your Phone, because if you're an iPhone user or a iPad user, people talk about jailbreaking those things. If you're an Android user like Lisa and me, people talk a bit more about rooting them rather than jailbreaking, but I'll get into that in a second. First, let me tell you a little bit, for those of you who don't know about CIW, who we are and who's sponsoring this. This is the commercial part. We are your Internet Technology Certification Program. We focus on the skills that set you apart. We take a holistic approach to certification. In other words, we don't just provide the exams, as cool as those are. We provide courses and all sorts of assessments to get you up to speed. We focus on Internet skills, how to create video, SEO, social media, web design, and we put people on a lifelong learning path in regards to Internet skills, and we keep people away from a vendor's product treadmill. We're vendor neutral. We focus on the best vendor applications as judged by the industry, open source as well as proprietary. And then we take a competency and job role-based approach to education. And as a result, we've been globally accepted. And so our whole idea is to show how we can, from CIW Web Foundations Associate all the way through to our security certification, lead you through your career as an IT administrator, manager, executive, or throughout your associate's, bachelor's, master's degree, and that sort of thing. So I'm James Stanger, a President and Chief Certification Architect. You can learn more about me. You can go up to Wikipedia and type in my name, and some of that information in there is actually accurate. Over the years, I've worked as a technologist in the security industry, and also as an educator and an instructor. Well, folks, let's talk about your mobile phone. Okay, that's what we're all here for. And I'll answer the question right away. Somebody already has asked a question. What's the benefit of jailbreaking or rooting your mobile device? You know, there are quite a few benefits, quite a few drawbacks. So you have to be very careful in doing it. And I'll say a couple of things right away to answer that question. And then one of my slides here coming up will do a good thorough job of answering it. But one of them is, whenever you bought a phone, and I'll just ask you, Lisa, when you bought your phone, did you notice there was a lot of pre-installed software on it? You know, stuff that maybe...
Absolutely.
How much of it did you use?
I was actually thrilled to have as many apps as it came with, because that takes care of almost all of the regular stuff I want to do with a phone.
That's the cool thing about it. Some of the stuff, though, that gets pre-installed on it, like personally, I don't mind NASCAR, you know, the car racing, but I don't care about having a NASCAR application installed on my phone. Problem is, on my particular phone, I can't uninstall that particular piece of software, that app. If I jailbreak my phone, yeah, if I jailbreak my phone, or as we call it in the Android world, if I root it, right, I can uninstall that software if I want. It gives you more choice. You can also get more tethering options if you jailbreak your phone. So that's something that, just a real quick answer. I wanted to make sure I got that, but you'll get a real thorough answer, folks, of why you should or why you shouldn't jailbreak your phone in a second. Let's talk about your mobile phone and connection types. Before I do that, though, folks, look at your chat window. There's a little chat or questions window or chat window, either one. A few people already have talked about the phones that they have. For example, Kyle has an iPhone 4S. Jim has an iPhone 4. Guys, tell me about what your what phones do you have? Now, Lisa and I have the Galaxy Note 2, right? What phones do you have? Why don't you go ahead? I want to make the session as interactive as possible. Type something into the chat window or whatever. We have somebody with a Galaxy Nexus. That's an interesting phone. It's kind of the pure Android experience. We have somebody with a 4S who has a jailbroken phone. Good for you, Shaw. The Motorola Atrix. Okay, keep typing them in, folks. I'm curious to see what people have. While you're typing that in, I think one of the first things to talk about, I suppose people who've jailbroken their phone know this, but there's more than one way to connect your phone to the internet or to the web or whatever you want to call it. First of all, there's through your mobile provider. That's through the cell phone tower, okay? Verizon, O2 if you're in Europe and the UK, AT&T, that sort of thing. That provides voice, data, and internet. It's not the same, though, as your Wi-Fi Ethernet connection. And I think there are quite a few people that don't even have that distinction. We cover that in CIW, Internet Business Associate. So the whole world, every student should be taking that. But Wi-Fi connects to the internet just like your traditional PC, right? That means that your phone has a couple of different radios in it, to put it, well, simply. One of the radios, the cell phone towers, okay? So as you're driving down the road, it moves from cell tower to cell tower every dozen or so miles. Wi-Fi is a different radio that is installed, or device, installed in your device. And it doesn't count towards your mobile data or mobile cap, right? But it will definitely count towards your ISP's mobile count. So in other words, it's important to understand that your mobile phone can connect to the internet through cell phone towers, but it can also connect through Wi-Fi. If you're going to get your coffee at Starbucks or whatever, in my case, hot chocolate, you could access your email and all the fun stuff through Wi-Fi. But you're not going to get voice generally through Wi-Fi unless you use an application such as Skype. So it's one of the first things I wanted to establish here, the difference here. You'd be surprised how many people don't know the difference. Now, there are alternative ways to connect to the internet as well. You can even, there are ways that you can, I suppose, do it through Bluetooth, but usually Bluetooth, that is used to connect your earphone to your some sort of peripheral. And then there are physical ways in which you can connect your phone to the internet, but I won't go into those in depth. Let's talk a bit about tethering. When it comes to tethering, it makes it possible to share your internet connection. In other words, when I say share your internet connection, let's suppose for some reason your Wi-Fi access is down. Your whole home access that you access through your Comcast or Charter or Cox Cable or wherever you are, whatever ISP you use for the internet is down. How would you access the internet? I ask this question because about 2 years ago, I was without power in my house for about 3 or 4 days. That means my ISP wasn't working. My Comcast cable modem wasn't working. But you know what? All I had to do was enable tethering on my mobile phone. And my mobile phone, which I kept charged through a generator, I was able to connect my PC through a Wi-Fi connection to the internet. And nobody really knew that I didn't have internet for that time. I was able to download and upload, check my email, do all sorts of work. So tethering is a way of sharing your mobile phone's internet connection to provide access to homes, computers, to friends, coworkers, and that sort of thing. You can save bandwidth charges on the Comcast or the cable modem side of things. So there's two ways that, when it comes to tethering, two ways you can connect your mobile phone to a more traditional computer, a laptop or a notebook. One, you can use your laptop computer's Wi-Fi radio device, right, and connect to your phone. That's one way to do it. Back when I was doing it, they had a shared way that I would basically connect my USB, my phone to a USB connector, and then I would take the other end of the connector and plug it in to my notebook computer, and I was able to share a connection that way. Generally, I prefer the Wi-Fi way. Anything that is wireless, I think I prefer. So tethering is a pretty cool thing. But the first question is, does your provider allow it? Generally, a provider, if it allows tethering, will charge you extra, some sort of extra monthly fee, okay, to tether your phone. And the reason I'm going into this about how there's an extra fee is that if you want to jailbreak your phone, right, or root your phone, it's possible to get additional tethering features. Some people will jailbreak their phone because, believe it or not, that bypasses the fees, okay? People can get free services. I'm not advocating that because I'm not advocating anybody stealing services from their ISP, but that's another reason, by the way, that people will jailbreak or root their phone. When tethering, you may be able to use various connection types. Like I said, Wi-Fi is the one that's preferred, but there's cable-based. You use a mini USB cable or a micro USB cable. I should have put micro in there rather than mini. And other connection types are available, especially on your mobile phone. So there's some limitations. First of all, there are times when you will have to install some proprietary software on your phone, maybe even on your Windows or your Mac traditional device. And there's cost. It's worth repeating that there's cost implications to tethering. And you can reduce limits by purchasing what's called a mobile hotspot. That's basically kind of like an extra, in a sense, an extra cell phone, because you're buying something that connects to the cell phone towers, but it turns around and then offers up Wi-Fi connections for multiple people. Back in the day, I remember having a lot of internet parties where people would come over and they connect through my hub or my switch. Nowadays, you can have that kind of party with a mobile hotspot or even with your mobile phone. That's an advantage of tethering. Well, so I just wanted to get into some basic connection types to discuss that. So thank you, everybody, by the way, for typing in all the phones that you're using. I see a lot of Apple users, good stuff, so thank you very much. If you have any questions, by the way, about anything that we've been talking about, I'd be happy to answer it. But let's talk a bit about what it means to root or jailbreak a phone. And there's a question, Carol, you're asking, is tethering the same as creating a hotspot? Yeah, it is. It is the same thing. It is the same thing. It's just a different term. Well, jailbreaking and rooting, okay? Jailbreaking a phone, like I said, the Apple culture calls it jailbreaking. Rooting, the Android culture. Let me explain why. In the Android world, taking your phone and getting basically total control over your phone is called rooting, because mobile phone operating systems are based on, most of them anyway, a lot of them are based on Unix or Unix-like systems. The iPhone is based on BSD Unix, excuse me. The Android is based on Linux. The ultimate, most powerful user on a Unix or a Linux system is called root. Okay, that's why they call it rooting, because you then have access to something called a root prompt. And then, because you have ultimate access to that phone, you can basically do anything you want with it. Like I mentioned earlier, remove or add software that normally the providers either want you to have and you can't get rid of, or you can add software that the providers would rather you not have. Okay? It's called jailbreaking more in the Apple world, because the idea of, Apple, as cool as their stuff is. I mean, I think Apple makes the best, most compelling boxes in the world, whether the box be as big as your hand or the box be a laptop. They make really, really svelte devices, just like we saw yesterday with the new rollout of the iPad. But a lot of people feel, as cool as the software is, they're kind of limited and told what to do with their hardware. And the idea is that you can take that piece of hardware and install your own operating system on it. I know several people who have taken their wonderful iPhone and actually installed a version of Linux on it. They've installed a completely different operating system on it. Or they've kept the Apple iOS operating system on it, but they've jailbroken it so that they can add anything they want with it. So, back in the day, jailbreaking a phone or rooting a phone, it was seen, I think, as only a hacker or a geek activity, and it still can be. But now, there are a lot of vendors that support jailbreaking. They'll actually provide software themselves that will say, if you want to jailbreak your phone, go ahead. I'll get into some of the drawbacks of doing that in a second. But you use specialized software, and it removes all of the phone limitations. And this software is generally something that is run from a Windows system or maybe a Unix system. So I wanted to get into kind of the jailbreaking and rooting essentials a bit so that people understood what I'm talking about here. And this is something I'd like to make a point on. It's interesting, Lisa, to see how, when it comes to jailbreaking a phone, that as much as we love our mobile phones, and most people these days, I think, are increasingly moving towards using their phone as their primary computing device. And that's a phenomenon that's only taken place over the last few years. Before, the primary mobile device was your desktop, your Apple, your Windows system. But now people are starting to really use their tablets more and their phones more. My point, though, is that if you want to jailbreak a phone, you're really going to have to rely on a Windows system pretty much, even if it's an Apple system. Well, an Apple or a Windows computer, you're going to have to rely on that because you have to use this specialized software that you run on a Windows system, and then you connect your phone via, in case of an Android, you connect it to your via a micro USB cable, and then you run code on your Windows system that recognizes your Android phone, and then it will go out and install special software on your Android phone that basically jailbreaks it or roots it. That's kind of how it works. If there are any questions so far, just go ahead about this. Go ahead and type it in there. Type it in there, and I'd be happy to answer it. So when it comes to Windows 8 phones, things like that, I'm less familiar with Windows phones. I know a lot about the Apple phones, and I know a lot about the Android phones and Apple phones, but not so much about them. When it comes to jailbreaking, you can gain, here are the advantages. First of all, you can gain better usage of the hardware, including CPU overclocking. Overclocking means that if a CPU is told to run at a certain number of gigahertz, right, you can actually, using special software, tell the CPU to run faster. And in fact, there are a lot of times where there's a mobile phone, there are mobile phones out there that have a certain CPU. The software basically throttles the software on the phone will throttle the CPU, and basically, even though the CPU might be something that runs at, let's say, 10, it will only run it at 8. It will run it slower. And if you jailbreak your phone, you can use software to run that that CPU at its capacity, or even over its capacity. And that can be a bit dangerous in terms of generating too much heat or what have you. But that's one of the benefits. Here's another example that's fairly interesting. My phone, at least one of my previous phones, has an AM radio crystal in it. In other words, if I wanted to, I could use some software and listen to AM radio, completely independent of Wi-Fi, completely independent of my cell phone tower. So I'm not talking about using iHeartRadio or some sort of mobile phone app. I'm talking about using an old-fashioned AM radio, or actually it's FM radio signal. And my point is that my phone, though, won't let me at that crystal. The manufacturer just said, no, I'm not going to let it be used. But now, if with my jailbroken phone, all I have to do is install a piece of software, and I can use that radio now. Okay, so it's a feature that's available, but is not really truly accessible because the manufacturer or some provider said, no, I don't want that to happen. You can also, with jailbreaking, get more tethering options. Some providers disable tethering, which limits your usage. Some jailbreakers get free tethering, like I mentioned. You can also remove bandwidth limits. You can remove bloatware. And when it comes to software, you can also install better software. That, for example, I know a few people with disabilities in terms of what they can see and what they can't see. And they jailbreak or root their phone and install software that allows them to see their phone better, that gives them more accessibility. A lot of people who like games will jailbreak their phone so that they can install fancier games. That also has to do with overclocking your CPU Games, of course, tend to be very memory and CPU intensive, and so you can install, after you root your phone, you can access your resources better. You can do better backup and restore, okay, with a jailbroken or rooted phone. You can even install entirely new operating systems. You can install DriveDroid instead of the traditional Android operating system. Well, how does jailbreaking work? Well, first of all, you got to make sure that rooting your phone is right for you, and you got to make sure you back up your data. And in a slide or two, I'm going to explain some of the dangers of jailbreaking. So I'm talking about here the pleasures of it, but you have to understand this is something that can be a very risky proposition. So if you run yourself into trouble, it's not my fault, but don't run yourself into trouble. So go into this with open eyes before you do this. But let's talk about how it works first. First of all, you obtain software meant for your device. This means that if you have to understand your phone very carefully, because the software that you use to jailbreak or root your phone has to be extremely specific to the physical hardware of the device you have. So grab out your phone right now and look at it, right? The software that you download from the rooting and jailbreaking sites has to fit your hardware to a T. That means you may have to take the battery out of your phone and look at the serial number of your physical device to make sure that it actually jives or matches with the software you'd like to use to root your phone. If there's the slightest difference, there could be a serious issue, and you could end up, as you could end up bricking your phone, turning it into a brick. Okay. So it has to fit the exact operating system and firmware of your device as well. So those three things are kind of a trifecta, as it were, of three things that you have to make sure you get right when it comes to rooting your phone. So if it's close enough, it might work, but chances are you could cause a problem. Now, running the software, and again, what you do is you connect your cell phone via a USB cable to your computer, and I'm just going to assume an Android, so you attach it to a Windows computer. You run the software on your on the desktop computer or your notebook, and then it will go out and recognize your mobile phone and go out and install software and run things on the Android or the Apple phone to root and unlock your phone. And then you can install lots of new software or uninstall things. You can even install a new boot manager or a new ROM, read-only memory piece of software that will bring new features to your phone. So it's basically you taking total control over the phone and deciding what operating system you want to boot, what applications and services you want to run automatically, that sort of thing. Lisa and I were talking earlier, at least to each other, about how sometimes it's frustrating because there are a lot of services that will run automatically on a phone that draw down your battery life very quickly. A lot of these services you have control over. You can run task manager applications and get rid of those services. But in many times, because of the bloatware that is installed on your Android or on your Apple phone, a lot of those services start automatically without your say-so. And with jailbreaking your phone, you can actually make it so those services no longer run or are uninstalled. And that way your battery life will last longer. So when you root your phone, it will take between 10, that's awfully short, about 30 minutes. I've seen rooting take a bit longer when it goes well. Sometimes you even have to repeat it. If you don't follow the procedures that are given, you could end up destroying your phone, at least temporarily. Okay, there are a couple of things you can do. You may have to reinstall the operating system, but in some cases, the rooting software could cause problems in your phone and in the firmware and in its ability to boot to where, frankly, nothing can be done with the phone. And if you take it into the provider, sometimes the provider has a way of determining, somebody's been trying to root this phone, and they'll void the warranty. So if you have a brand new $600 phone, you may have a $600 brick. Okay, $600 piece of hardware that you can't do anything with. So who does this? According to the industry, there are about 10% of mobile phone and tablet users today. Some estimates go as high as 20. I kind of go with 20. I think it's a bit higher than 10%. So something to emphasize. When it comes to rooting and jailbreaking your phone, please don't forget the steps. If you decide to go to root your phone, back up your files. Okay? Back up all the phone information, your account information, social media, email, storage, Flickr, Carbon Copy, whatever you use, back up that information. Your SD card, you can remove that so it doesn't get damaged. Remember, there's onboard memory. I think a lot of people don't quite differentiate in their phones between an SD card, and I'm not talking to you Apple users, you don't get SD cards, but I'm talking about Android people, for example, and Windows users. Your SD card is different than your onboard memory. So make sure you understand the difference between them and back up all the information you have. But understand sometimes that backup doesn't even work, because if you permanently disable your phone, and I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it could, even backup won't work too much. So let's go real quick into problems associated with jailbreaking your device. First of all, did you know in some countries, at least technically, it's illegal to do this? Okay, so I am not trying to provoke you into breaking the law. I'm not too interested in that. But according to the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, in some cases, it could be illegal to jailbreak your phone. Official reasons include, well, you're messing around with the intellectual property of that operating system, and you shouldn't be doing that because you don't own it. You've signed an end-user license agreement that allows you to use the software, but not to mess around with it and alter it in any way. That's the official reason. And then the DRM technologies, the digital rights management technologies, also, if you mess with those, that is part of messing around with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, at least in the United States, and other countries have similar laws. Other reasons include, you know, you may not want to jailbreak or root your phone, because if you'd wait a little while, most providers listen pretty carefully to what customers want, and they add features as you go. And you may want to wait to see if that sort of thing happens rather than jumping the gun and having somebody do it, and then do it for you. So I'm not going to get into the politics of whether you should or should not jailbreak the phone. I'm just giving you an awareness of some of these drawbacks. First of all, you can lose your data. Most people, frankly, don't back up as much as you say as much as I say you should. Many people don't. It's hard to back up all the information from all the different places on a phone, and you can also lose your phone. Okay. Most vendors will avoid your warranty if they notice that you have rooted and they don't allow rooting. Okay. So make sure that you are very carefully understand what the implications are of jailbreaking a phone. Okay, and providers and vendors do have ways to kind of see if you've tried to jailbreak or root your phone. They can see that the incremental number on the boot sector has been changed, or files have been written to areas that are really only read-only, and if they see that, automatically they'll say, well, you tried to break your phone and you got burned, and there's nothing we can do to help you. So those are some things about what it means to root or jailbreak your phone. Let's see, if anybody has any questions, just go ahead and type it in there. Lisa, you might want to tell me if what specific questions people have. For example, there's somebody who asks, what is flashing a phone? There are two ways in which flashing a phone has meaning. One of them is you can flash the firmware of the phone. And that's a standard thing that is done every so often. Everybody here on this conversation should, at some point, update the firmware on their device. Do it in the official way. To update your firmware, you don't have to root or jailbreak your phone. To update your firmware, you go into a certain area of the settings of your phone, and then it'll say update firmware. You click on it, make sure you have a good signal so you can get the firmware download. And flashing the firmware basically means that you have updated it, and you can get some nice benefits there, better CPU usage, all that sort of thing. Another way of flashing a phone, again, is I've seen people use that term to talk about jailbreaking their phone, because now they are basically taking their operating system and replacing it. So I've seen it used in two different ways. Any other questions, Lisa, that folks have?
There's quite a lot of questions coming in. There was another question about keeping data private by using encryption on a rooted phone. Are you going to be covering that in a little bit?
You know, let me talk about that just a second. I'll keep this slide up here having to do with mobile security, because that's something that I think is important to bring up, and I didn't cover it, and I should have. When it comes to security and a rooted phone, again, you become the master of the master and controller, right? You control the, excuse me, the horizontal and the vertical on that phone, which is kind of cool. And because that means that you can use different forms of encryption on that phone. You're no longer limited to the choices given to you by the Android or by that operating system or by iOS. Okay, that's cool. But because you're also in control, you have major responsibility to encrypt or to properly control that phone. And if you don't know what you're doing, you could end up in trouble in a couple of different ways. Let's start with encryption, then I'll talk about viruses. One of the implications about encryption is that if you jailbreak your phone, you can have a choice about using stronger encryption than is normally allowed. In some countries, that could be bad. That's breaking the law. In many countries, you cannot use certain bit levels of encryption, or else it's illegal. And if you get caught with that phone, there could be real legal implications there. So you have to be very careful with that. You can also download, if that's not an issue, you can download better operating systems that have higher encryption. One of the issues to think about, though, is where are you getting the encryption software? Where are you getting that particular operating system file from? Who's offering it? I mean, is it some website that looks really cool and compelling? Well, unless you read through the code or really have a good understanding of who created that, somebody could be punking you. Somebody could be owning you. And you install something on your phone that allows people to listen in. And I don't mean maybe listen in on voice conversations necessarily, but they can certainly be grabbing data from you. You don't know where that code is coming from. So unless it's been vetted by a lot of people you trust, thousands of users, hundreds of users that are programmers who are really smart, security people, I would be very careful as to what I install when I root my phone. So that's encryption. I wanted to cover that. Another thing that I wanted to bring up when it comes to antivirus is I believe that any homogeneous environment is, how should I say it, ripe for destruction. Okay, is something that can become very, very vulnerable to a mass worm attack. Some of us on the call, of the 100, 200 people on this call, are old enough to remember the Melissa and I love you viruses, or newer things like Configure, or what happened in Iran with the Stuxnet worm. All of those examples have to do with a virus, or actually a worm, or a virus that was able to attack similar operating systems. Windows systems that were exactly the same. A worm could pass easily from one to the other. In the example of Iran with Stuxnet, that attacked SCADA software, and that's software that handles massive amounts of automated machinery. In this case, centrifuges. All the centrifuges, you have to control them somehow, and you control them through a central control panel. Well, all those systems were connected in exactly the same way through a Windows ODBC driver, and the virus simply attacked all of those systems because they had never been updated, and the virus just went from one system to the other and attacked it and ruined them. What does that have to do with mobile phones? Well, if your mobile phone, if you jailbreak it, right, and you remove all those protections and you don't adequately re-protect your phone, you could make yourself very, very vulnerable to a virus. Other people would say, well, actually, James, if you jailbreak your phone, you'll make it dissimilar, unlike all the other millions of Android phones that are out there, and you may protect yourself from a worm that could attack all the other unsuspecting, non-rooted phone users. So that's the debate I wanted to cover, having to do with encryption, but also with viruses. Those are major downsides. By the way, somebody asked a question: can you unroot a phone? And generally, yeah, generally you can. What you do is, if you decide that your phone, you no longer want it to be rooted, what you can do is go back, excuse me, and reinstall, do a complete and total factory reinstall of the phone. You'll be right back to your phone as when you first unboxed it after you got the phone from your Best Buy store or wherever you got it from. But generally you can. So that's something to think about. So let's talk a bit about mobile security, and then I'll get into some suggestions for the software that you can use to unroot your phone. How about that? First, some basics. I think all of us have heard about various controversies involving the United States NSA or various other countries' versions of security organizations that basically go around to find metadata about phone calls. And so let's explain what metadata is. Metadata means data about data. So imagine you make a phone call, okay? You've just gotten out of the doctor's office. Here's a scenario. You just got out of the doctor's office, okay? And you make a phone call to a pharmacy, right, for your prescription. And you make a phone call to a few members of the family, okay? Let's assume for a moment that a company or a government agency can't listen in on that phone call. What kind of conclusion can they make? You come out of the doctor's office, you call the pharmacy, you call a few loved ones. What kind of conclusion can they make about the location of that phone call, about the destination of those calls? I think, personally, they can draw an enormous amount of conclusions, to the point where, in some cases, they may not even need to listen into the voice conversation, because they can conclude, well, clearly James came out of that doctor's office, called the pharmacy and a few members of the family. Sounds like he's sick, needs a prescription. Gee, that could even be something serious, okay? Metadata, again, is data that includes where the call went to, where it originated, what cell tower it came from, okay? And any entity, and I don't mean just that government entity, I mean a company, such as your mobile provider, or Google, or any other entity, can triangulate that information and learn quite a bit about you. Now, I don't mean to get spooky here or scary, or, you know, I'm not sitting here wearing a tinfoil hat to keep out the government rays from reading my brain, okay? But you have to understand that metadata, we generate tons of it every day. And various organizations gather and interpret that data. People will call this big data. Google has been collecting data like this for years, okay, to learn more about how to market and to sell that information. Traffic analysis is the practice of triangulating data that you generate as you get online. So they basically look into it and they draw conclusions, and many of them are remarkably accurate. So the reason I'm talking about the idea of what metadata is to give you an understanding of what it is. So your mobile device can track you. It doesn't have to. You can turn those things off. But it can track you via GPS, through your data traffic that you generate, and Wi-Fi traffic, both through cell phones and your cell phone provider as well as your Wi-Fi provider, and any services that you access. Okay? Well, there are tools that make it possible for you or anybody to grab a hold of this data on your phone or on your computer and analyze it, okay, and enumerate it, to enumerate metadata or analyze it. Okay, so FOCA, F-O-C-A, is an example of a piece of software, and you can go and get that from sourceforge.net. You can Google for it. Type in FOCA and metadata. You can grab the software. It runs on various operating systems, Windows. And you can use this to analyze the metadata of various files. So if you have Office files, Word, Excel spreadsheets, PDF files, images, HTML, web documents, all those things, you can run this, and it will go and find the data on various platforms, mobile phones, desktop, notebooks, and tablets. And if you look at the screenshot a little bit, it begins to go in and take a look at who created the document. When was it last altered? Okay? And using this information, it's possible to gather together statistically information, and you can start drawing conclusions about the users and the groups and the companies that created these documents. So this is software that's freely available today. Here's another piece of software. It's available on Windows and Linux, and I think even Apple operating systems. It's a tool for enumerating or surveying JPEG images. It's called Jhead because what it does is it reads the header information on a JPEG image. Take a look at that little screenshot there. That screenshot, the black screenshot, it runs Jhead against a little image. Notice what it does. It gives the file name, its size, the date when it was made, the camera that created it, the camera model, okay, the date it was made, was the flash used or not, that kind of thing. That's metadata information about the JPEG. For all I know, this is a JPEG image of one of my kids, okay? But reading metadata information, I can find out the situation about how this was created. Interestingly enough, Jhead does more than just read information on an image. You can actually use Jhead to change metadata information of that file. So not only can you read it, if Lisa takes a picture, sends it to me, I can find out, oh, okay, here's where she took it and that sort of thing. But I could also even change that information if I want, because this is information captured in the header of an image. So any image you look at, whether it be a PNG image, a TIFF, a JPEG, or a GIF file, as you open it, it has this metadata information. So you can learn about things that people have purchased. For example, this is somebody who is a Canon, if not a fan of the Canon company, but they use Canon. We know what they use now. Okay, you can add, so it's easy to identify technologies that you use, and you can even learn where you live, and I'll show that in a second. But my point is, metadata information, marketing people would be very interested in finding out the 140, 200 people here on this call, the types of technology they use. Okay, so let me show you an applied example here. You should see an image here of this old beat-up Land Cruiser that I have, and with a kayak on top of it. So you should see that now. That's a picture of my Land Cruiser and the kayak that I like to go out in, right? Great rig, okay? Real nice boat up top there. So what does this picture tell you right now? Okay, just think about it for a second. What does this picture tell you a little bit about? Well, it tells you a little bit about how I like to get outdoors, I suppose. And but it has metadata information as well that can really be quite useful. So in this image here, this is a screenshot of a Linux operating system. I used Jhead against this to read the headers of this file. Notice something. File name, file size, file date, camera make is my Samsung because I took it on my mobile phone, right? Here's the model being used. Here's when I took it, okay? Some resolution information, not so information. But look down near the bottom of that. Lisa, do you see it near the bottom there where some information that could be interesting? That is information. That's GPS information, okay? So on the next slide, right, I'll show you an image that came out of my phone, and let me explain that just for a second. Notice this image. It's the same image, but notice it has an AccuWeather.com little piece of information on it. It says cloudy day, okay, and then it says Ellison Loop Northwest, and it gives a date. Where did AccuWeather get that information? And where did my phone get that information, and why did it apply it to that image? Well, folks, we all love our convenience, and we all love, through social media, to be as communicative as possible. If a picture tells 1,000 words, right, how cool is it that you have an image that even contains words to describe itself, how it was taken, where it was taken? That's very useful when you upload things to Pinterest or upload things to Facebook, etc. Okay? I think you get the idea. My phone got this information and was able to go out and talk to AccuWeather and add this information and say, hey, in the Seattle area, here's what the weather's like. It captured this information from GPS and embedded it in the image. Most smartphones can do this, right? They're not. A lot of them are not enabled by default. They aren't. But here's my point. Here's the point. If you download the latest really cool app, I don't care if it's Facebook or whatever cool app you like, sometimes those apps will enable GPS information. They'll tell you, but if you're distracted or really want it for that time being, they will enable that information even if you explicitly disable it. Okay? They won't do it behind your back, but it's very easy for this information to get enabled during the mobile phone app installation process. So as you update Pinterest or SMS your images, you're actually engaging in a security concept called information leakage. Okay, you're leaking information. So now, if you take a picture, it would be possible for somebody to say, Lisa's out of town. It's like, well, how do you know this? Well, because she uploaded something to Flickr yesterday, and all of the GPS information says that she was in Europe. Lisa, you lucky person. I know she's out of town. Well, what are the implications of this? I think you can begin to understand if strangers see information like that, people know where you are, and that's something you may not want to do. These are the kinds of things that you can think about. Well, what can you do to protect your phone? Yes, you can encrypt your SD card. You can encrypt native memory. You can disable certain features, such as GPS tagging, okay, or app-based tagging. You can use a passcode on your phone. You can enable remote data wiping. When you lose your phone, people, when you lose your phone, not if, but when, who gets that phone? Now, back in the day, and 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, if you lost your phone, you called the ISP, they disabled it, and the bad guy pretty much got a few of your phone numbers, okay? You know, your address book, okay, fine. Nowadays, if you lose your phone, think of all the email. Think of all the information that's there, all the account information. That's your life, right? So how do you solve that? Well, if you use a passcode every day on your phone, it's a bit inconvenient, but that can help because the person would then have to guess your passcode, okay? Another thing you can do, though, is to have an app that remotely wipes the data from your phone. That basically turns your phone, if not into a brick, it removes all personal information and returns it to its factory default. I'd be very careful with that kind of software simply because if somebody, as a prank, wants to ruin your phone for you, if they get a hold of that code, they can do that. I can just see my kids doing that to their old man, to me, as a joke. Well, probably not, but I think it'd be tempting for them. So these are ways in which you can protect your phone. And so it's all about the steps that you take and the inconvenience you want to impose upon yourself. The enemy to security is convenience. We all want convenience, but think of steps that you can take to protect yourself in regards to these kinds of issues that I've discussed today. And remember, your notebooks and desktop computers contain similar information. I don't know about GPS information, but they contain similar information, and if you're not taking steps to secure yourself, I think you should. I've collected a few resources together, okay, talking about cellular and Wi-Fi, and how, for example, Cisco seems to be saying that mobile phones are going to be using Wi-Fi in much more creative ways, and talking about how cell phones work, the pros and cons of jailbreaking your phone, and that's a good Tech Republic article that will get you started about the types of software that you can use for your phone and the types of groups that are out there, pretty reputable groups that are out there. It also helps explain how certain vendors out there have no problem offering themselves jailbreaking software officially. There's some information about maybe how it's illegal to jailbreak certain things, what metadata is, and what it can tell authorities about you. So this is information that will help you install the best apps for rooted phones. And so I wanted to give this to you. Everybody will have a chance to to download a PDF of this slide deck so that you can go ahead and take a look at it. So what I want to do in the next 5 to 10 minutes or so is to answer folks' questions if they have them in regards to jailbreaking a device or in regards to security. Lisa, what kinds of things are people asking there? And by the way, folks, a lot of phones do not ship with GPS with the GPS metadata tagging capability by default. You have to actively enable that. But like I said, if you're installing a mobile phone, a piece of mobile phone software that wants to use it, it will have various persuasive ways to get you to enable it. They'll use language that you're not quite familiar with sometimes, and they'll get at it that way. One person's asking, are there any specific warnings with jailbreaking on the major U.S. carriers, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint? Yeah. They many of them basically say don't do it. If you do it, you know, your mileage may vary. You're doing it at your own risk. That's something to think about.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of the questions that are left are relating to is, what are the situations with specific providers, both in the U.S. and internationally, and then, do you have any recommendations about specific devices?
Yeah.
There's so many of them out there, I'm not sure if we can make any recommendations.
No, I know what you're saying. There was somebody, one of the participants was asking, hey, generally, do you recommend rooting one's mobile phone? Yes or no, James. Come on, take a stand. And I have to say my answer is no. I wouldn't recommend doing it. I really wouldn't. If you were to take CIW Internet Business Associate as a course, for example, and really know the technologies well, and you get your phone and get to know it really well, extremely well, then go for it. But there are a lot of risks there, so I generally would say no, a qualified no. But it's an interesting thing. And by the way, if you have an older phone, right, you might want to consider rooting that, right? Because if it's lost, you're not using it anyhow, right? That's how I got started.
Right. I think my feeling on that would be you probably need to have a really good reason for doing it. You know, if you're involved in the security field and you need to pay attention to what's happening to these kinds of technologies. You know, if you're responsible, for example, for securing a lot of phones that are issued by your organization to your fellow employees, your coworkers and so on, you need to pay attention to the technology. The best way to understand it is to do it. You know, maybe then there's a good reason for doing it. You know, maybe you work in a special industry that's got extremely high security needs, and you need to pay attention to that. You know, or you're you know, a major technology geek and you want to understand how it works so that you can write about it or teach about it or help others understand it. But yeah, I think for the general average user, you know, you risk a lot without necessarily getting a lot of benefits. Is the way I kind of read it.
Yeah, I think so. And it's an interesting question here. It's saying, hey, is there software available to root older smartphones, you know, 2.5 years old, kind of thing? The answer is yes, but let me qualify this a little bit, and I think it's an interesting point. The rooting culture is something that tends to be based in the now, and by that, in other words, by that I mean they like to get the latest and greatest phones. And so they tend not to go back and say, oh, I've got new software that's even more efficient than ever before. It used to take an hour to root your phone. Now it takes considerably less. They tend not to go back and retrofit old phones because they want to root the latest and greatest phone. So that's my caveat. So the software is available, but most of the time they won't say, oh, and this software will work on previous phones. They don't worry so much about the past. So it's one thing that one of the questions that was asked. Yeah, you can go ahead and use the software for a best practices campaign. Give me a call and we can talk about that. No problem. You know, as far as operating systems that can be jailbroken, okay. My son jailbroke his Apple phone. Hopefully that wasn't illegal. Hopefully they won't go to Japan and throw him in jail. And the Android system. I'd say those are the two main ones that can be done. There's a question here about jailbreaking a phone without the EMSI code. You need all the code information, and that's a piece of code information that you have to get. Again, the software that you download will have very detailed instructions about how to do it. And by the way, YouTube has information as well. You can see people as they go through and jailbreak or root their phone. You can see it in action even as they do it. There's a great point here asked by an individual. I think it's Dean. Excuse me. A lot of executables for doing this seem pretty sketchy. Are there some sites that provide these tools more trustworthy than others? Yes, certainly. First of all, the most trustworthy sites are actual vendors that provide their own jailbreaking software. Okay, that's the first step. But very quickly you can get into, I like that term sketchy, you can get into Sketchyville pretty quickly with a lot of the software. So, you know, buyer beware, caveat emptor. Let's see, we're starting to run out of time. Lisa, any other questions or anything you'd like to mention before we go ahead and end the call here at the top of the hour?
Not at this point. I do see, I'm still trying to review some of these questions myself.
Yeah, you know, there's a question about, you know, how can I ensure if I mess up my rooted phone that the factory reset will still work? The answer is you can't. The only way that you can find out, right, if a factory reset will work, where you reinstall the operating system and bring things back to square one, is go on the Android or the Apple forums for jailbreaking, for rooting, and find out very specific to your model what people say. And if you can find a consensus of people who say, yeah, I can't seem to get back to square one, then that tells you. But if they all say, yeah, there is a fail-safe, there is a way to get back to square one, then you're okay. I would trust those forums. If you just come across one or two entries, I wouldn't trust them. If you come across a dozen, I would then, you know, trust that trend. So I would do that. And I think messing with your old phone would be a very safe way to do it. I think that when it comes to jailbreaking, a lot of people feel that because they can take control of the phone, that they can actually improve the security of the phone, that they can improve its flexibility. That way, they say, well, I paid money for this phone. Even if it's a $600 phone, usually you buy phones on an upgrade, so you only pay, let's say, $200 for it, or $100, or maybe less. They will say, I paid money for that, and I really want the ability to control it myself. And that way, I've spent my money on something that now I have more control over. I can use it more wisely. There's a question about rooting the Kindle Fire HD. You know, I don't know the answer to that. You got me. Google that. That's interesting. Can you root the Kindle Fire, for example? And meaning that, because Kindle uses the Linux operating system, if you root it, would you be able to install Google Play and then run it on Kindle Fire? Interesting idea. Well, we're starting to run out of time, so I want to go ahead and close the webinar. So thank you very much, folks. We've talked about connection types, tethering essentials, rooting and jailbreaking a phone, how to secure your phone, and setting up your home network. Our next webinar, folks, is whatever happened to Web 2.0, that term. Analytics, big data, and the Internet of Things. What a term, the Internet of Things. We're going to be talking about that here just before Thanksgiving here in the United States, November 20th from 8 to 9 Pacific. And you can register at CIWcertified.com. And, of course, you can follow us on various social media. And here are the links. But all you have to do is go to Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube to follow us at CIW. So I want to thank you very much, everybody, for your attention. And thank you, Lisa, for helping us out. You do a wonderful job as always. So I'll turn the time back over to you. You bet, man, anytime.
All right. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As we have pointed out, it will be available on our website, both the recording of the presentation and the slide deck of the presentation in PDF format. That will be available on our website in a few days, and I believe we'll be sending out an announcement about that to all of our attendees. Thank you for joining us, everyone, today, and have a great day.